Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Cannabis should be legalised to end the embarrassment of domestic drugs policy, according to a cross-party group of MPs. They've estimated changing the UK's drugs laws would bring in more than £1 billion a year for the Treasury. Well, to debate that, we're joined by the Conservative MP Peter Lilly, who's calling for the legalisation of cannabis. He joins us from Westminster. It'll bring in tax revenue from the government, that is true, but what else do you think legalisation would really achieve?
Well, it will end the greatest harm that the present situation involves, whereby people who do use cannabis can only get it from illegal gangs who often push them to take hard drugs as well. So we're pushing soft drug users into the arms of hard drug pushers. And we're also creating a vast industry for drug gangs, which gives them a lot of income, which would be better channeled through an illegal outlet, taxed. I'm not in favour of encouraging cannabis use. I've never taken it myself, and that's probably why I've got a clear enough head to see that our present policy isn't working.
I mean, you say that, you know, that you have a clear enough head and that you don't want to push people into the hands of drug pushers, but there is a great deal of evidence that starting using cannabis does lead to other drugs. And it's not just because your pusher happens to sell more than one kind of drug. People want a different hit, a bigger fix. And cannabis has been shown to then lead on to people becoming addicted to other much, much stronger drugs. And that's the argument why we shouldn't legalise it, isn't it?
I don't think that is so. In the Netherlands, for example, it's legal to use cannabis, but as a result, people get it from legal outlets, and far fewer people in Holland go on from using cannabis to using hard drugs because they're not in contact with people pushing those drugs.
Do you have any concerns that it's normalising drug use? I mean, this is drug use. It's something that we shouldn't be encouraging, full stop, whether it's a Class C drug, a Class A or a B drug. And by making something like cannabis available legally, it is, in a sense, normalising it.
Well, I think it's important that we recognise there's a difference between things being right and them being lawful. Lots of things which are wrong, you know, like adultery, but we don't try and make that illegal. I'm not encouraging anyone to use cannabis. I wouldn't use it myself. I would discourage children from using it. But I think if we devote most of our drug control resources to preventing cannabis ineffectively, we don't control the hard drugs which do far more damage.
Having said that, if it is legalised, there will be people who will say, oh, you can get this legally, this isn't illegal, this isn't bad for me. I should be able to use it, and it makes it more normal, and it could lead to the numbers of people taking cannabis increasing.
Well, one's got to explain why in the Netherlands fewer people use cannabis than in this country, even though it's legally available. We haven't succeeded by making it illegal in stopping people using it. We have discredited the law, we've created a vast industry for criminals, we've put people on the route from soft drugs to hard drugs, and we've avoided having a potentially useful source of revenue for the government. And we haven't even made it available for medical uses.
What about the school of thought that because cannabis is illegal, that some people who would possibly use it are fearful, some people who want to avoid prison or who want to avoid a criminal record if they are caught with it will go into rehabilitation and will stop using it? Therefore, the fact that it is illegal is proving a deterrent to some people.
Well, as I say, there doesn't seem to be overmuch evidence, given that in countries where it is legal, the rate of use is either lower or about the same as in Britain. And some people think even the hint of illegality about it adds a little, interest and excitement to young people to take it. I think it should still be wrong to sell cannabis to underage people as it is to sell alcohol and tobacco.
What do you feel about the use of it for medicinal purposes? Do you feel confident, are you comfortable that there's been enough research done into the possible positives and indeed negatives of cannabis use for people who are using it for illness?
Well, clearly, if it's going to be prescribed for medical purposes, then it should go through all the tests of any other drug. But if people use it because it relaxes pain, and eases their suffering, then, and it's in safe form, then I see no harm in that.
What about the health implications of people who have very, very adverse reactions to it? There's a lot of evidence that young people, young men especially, react very badly, some of them, to taking marijuana, especially to the stronger skunk varieties, and it can lead to really significant mental health problems. Whether or not it's people in large numbers, for the small numbers of people who do take it, it can have a really, really negative effect. Do you still feel comfortable knowing that it could be legalised?
Well, one thing we can do if we sell it legally is have health warnings on it and at the places where it's sold, so that people who've got conditions with which it would react adversely will be warned of it, as they're not at present.
It doesn't stop young people drinking or smoking, though, does it? They know that's bad for them too.
Well, it stops some of them. You're not allowed to sell alcohol and tobacco to underage people. You shouldn't be allowed to sell cannabis or other drugs to them either. But we won't entirely prevent that, and we certainly haven't prevented it at present. So it's not as if the present system was working.
OK, Peter Lilly, good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Let's tell you about a cross-party group of MPs who has renewed calls for cannabis to be legalised. They describe Britain's drugs policy as belonging to the dark ages and say legalisation could generate more than £1 billion a year in tax revenue. The reports follow votes in 4 US states, including California and Nevada, to approve recreational marijuana. Well, Ed Boyd is policy director at the centre-right think tank, the Centre for Social Justice, and Liberal Democrat health spokesperson Norman Lamb is one of the MPs backing that report. Mr. Lamb, to you first of all, good afternoon to you gentlemen both. Mr. Lamb, why do you back this report?
Well, the war on drugs has been a catastrophic failure over several decades now. We manage every year to hand billions of pounds to organised crime. The illegal trade in drugs is associated with extreme violence, beheadings commonplace in Mexico, but the control of every community in our country is subject to extraordinary violence, because if there is a criminal gang supplying cannabis and other drugs to a particular locality, the only way in which they can protect their market is through the use of violence. So this is a disastrous failure. We criminalise large numbers of our younger people in particular. We criminalise people who use cannabis for medical purposes, for goodness sake. And yet at the same time, people in government who maintain these rules drink their alcohol, which is on the evidence the most dangerous drug of all, smoke their cigarettes, which kills about 100,000 people in our country every year. We know what happened with the prohibition of alcohol in the last century in America. It had disastrous consequences. The same applies to drugs, and the case now for changing the law on cannabis and regulating it, legalising it, controlling the potency is overwhelming.
So we can get both sides. Ed, your response to that?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad there's a focus here in terms of what really affects people's lives, because we work across 350 grassroots charities, and 75% of them, when we surveyed them, said that they were concerned about the effects that cannabis had on those that they worked with on a regular basis, trying to get people back into work, trying to help tackle addictions, trying to help people make the most of their potential. And the reason for this, if you look at the number of people when they're surveyed said that they would take a drug for the first time, having never taken it before, if it was legalised, around 30% of 16 to 24-year-olds said that they would. We know that 10% of those who try cannabis at any point become addicted to it. And then you look at the state of our treatment services, and unless you are rich or middle class, able to pay for your own treatment, there's very little available that's going to help you to tackle that addiction. And this is undermining people's potential and undermining their life chances.
OK, so Mr. Lamb, responsible legal regulation, how would that manifest itself?
Well, the beauty now, of course, is that we've got examples of it in several states. in the United States, and indeed another 4 states, including California, as you mentioned earlier, have voted in the last fortnight to legalise. And so we've seen that the world doesn't cave in when you do this. And actually, when the Lib Dems set up our expert panel, including a serving chief constable, for goodness sake, their advice was legalise, regulate in the interests of public health, not despite public health. If you're buying in a criminal market, you have no idea what you're buying. You have no idea of the potency of what you're buying, how dangerous it is. It's so much safer. It protects young people so much more if we can regulate it in a sensible and rational way.
Okay, Ed Boyd, so it benefits society and, you know, the byproduct potentially benefiting the Exchequer to the amount of £1 billion a year in tax revenue.
Yeah, I just note again that there's never any answer to this on will it lead to more people taking drugs, becoming addicted to drugs and having their lives ruined by drugs. And the reason is all the data shows that that is the case. That is what will happen. And so to argue that this is better for people's lives is I'm afraid, frankly, wrong.
No, the evidence actually points in precisely the opposite direction. The Home Office's own international study showed that the degree of toughness of your drug regime has no bearing on the use of drugs within society. About 7% of our population, adult population up to the age of 60 are now using cannabis regularly. So the idea that we, by criminalising it, we in some way restrict use is ridiculous. It's happening here and now. And there are many young people who are suffering the consequences of buying very dangerous strains on the street from criminals. Let's bring that to an end.
Ed Boyd?
Well, again, as I said, 30% of people aged 16 to 24 who have never taken drugs, never would take drugs, say that they would try a drug for the first time if it became legalised. I don't know how you get around that. If you make it wider than just 16 to 24-year-olds, it's 4 times as high. This is something that when you haven't got effective treatment...
Hold on, Ed Boyd, go.
When you haven't got effective treatment to help tackle addiction, it's simply dangerous to open the floodgates to addiction without giving people from the most disadvantaged backgrounds the opportunity to recover from those addictions.
You're flying in the face of all of the evidence, and if people are buying something in a regulated environment, which is actually not unsafe, which is a safe product, then surely that makes so much more sense than youngsters inadvertently buying skunk, really strong strains of it from criminals who have absolutely no interest in your welfare. All of the smart people these days internationally are recognising that you protect people better and you reduce violence in our impoverished communities if you regulate this rather than leaving it in the hands of criminals.
Ed Boyd, you're not smart.
Well, I'm happy to say that we're reflecting not just my views, but the views of hundreds of grassroots charities around the country. 75% of whom said that they were concerned...
Hold on, you've had your say. Ed Boyd, carry on.
These frontline poverty-fighting charities have said they're concerned about cannabis. The majority are against legalisation when we've surveyed them. And these aren't people in a Westminster bubble, part of any metropolitan elite, but people on the front line fighting poverty, saying that they are concerned about this. And if you're calling them stupid, then I think I'm going to be listening to their voice instead, I'm afraid.
No. It's such an easy slur to refer to the Metropolitan League. I'm a father. I have 2 adult sons. I'm as concerned as anyone about the dangers of drugs. I'm instinctively hostile to drugs, but I want to protect my sons and other young people through a rational, regulated market rather than leaving them to the prey of criminals, which is what your approach ultimately does.
Oh, Ed, you're in a lot of trouble now.
I think if we ultimately want to agree on something...
Ed Boyd.
I think there's a point hopefully we can both agree on that one area the government needs to focus on far more is that we need far better treatment to help those who, for whatever reason, have become addicted to drugs to overcome that addiction and make the most of their life. I think this is an area that people on all sides of the debate should be focusing on and getting the government to invest more in because it's going to make such a radical difference to those in impoverished communities.
OK, we're reaching the end of our discussion. So final points. Mr Lamb, to you first of all.
Well, the approach that they've taken in Portugal, where they've decriminalised all drugs, is to focus on the treatment that you've just referred to. It's precisely the right approach. The idea of giving someone a criminal record for taking something that ultimately is less dangerous than alcohol or tobacco is frankly ludicrous.
OK. Final thought from you, Ed Boyd?
Again, it's what we were saying before. Invest in treatment. Make sure that you don't open more people up to addiction by taking away legal sanctions. And you've got a safer place for people to grow up in, and you've got a greater opportunity to help more people reach their full potential and be addiction-free.
OK, we're going to keep you two separate, I think, once you get out of these studios. It's good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.